we need to talk about something that sounds simple on the surface, but is actually one of the hardest decisions any athlete can make, and that's leaving home before you're even a teenager just to chase a dream. Because when I heard Alexandra Eala say she had to get out of the Philippines at 13, I didn't hear criticism, I heard clarity. I heard a player who understood the system, the limitations, and the path forward way earlier than most people ever do. And that's where this gets interesting, because we're not just talking about a feel-good story, we're talking about a calculated career move that directly impacts development, ranking trajectory, and ultimately whether a player even has a chance to compete on the WTA Tour. Think about this for a second. At 13 years old, most players are still figuring out basic patterns, maybe playing local tournaments, maybe just starting to understand how to build points, and she's already making a high-level strategic decision about infrastructure, coaching ecosystems, and long-term progression. That's not normal, that's elite awareness. When she moved to the Rafa Nadal Academy, she didn't just change location, she changed the entire environment around her. And if you've followed tennis development closely, you already know environment is everything. We're talking about daily exposure to high-level sparring partners, structured periodization, access to world-class coaching, sports science, recovery systems, match analytics, all the things that turn raw talent into a professional product. Because talent alone doesn't scale, structure does. And I think this is the part a lot of people miss when they react emotionally to her quote. When she says the structure in the Philippines isn't very developed, she's not dismissing her country, she's identifying a gap, and more importantly, she's explaining why staying would have capped her ceiling. That's the key word here, ceiling. If your training environment doesn't constantly push your racket head speed, your footwork efficiency, your decision-making under pressure, you plateau. And in modern tennis, plateauing at 16 or 17 basically means you're out before you even begin. So when I hear her say she had to get out, I translate that into, she understood that her development curve needed friction, it needed resistance, it needed higher-level inputs. Because let's break it down technically. When you train in a high-performance academy like Nadal's, your average rally ball speed goes up, your reaction time gets compressed, your margin for error shrinks, and that forces adaptation. You don't get comfortable, you evolve, or you fall behind. And that's exactly the environment that players like Rafael Nadal built that academy around: intensity, discipline, repetition under pressure. Now here's where I think her story takes another layer. Because she didn't just leave, she committed, and there's a difference. Plenty of players move abroad, but not all of them fully buy into the system. She boarded there, she lived there, she immersed herself in it. That's a full identity shift at 13. No safety net, no familiar comfort, just tennis, structure, and expectation. And I'll be honest, that kind of decision usually shows up later in matches, in the moments when things get tight, when you're down break point, when your legs are heavy, because players who've gone through that early sacrifice tend to have a different kind of resilience. It's not just physical, it's psychological conditioning. Now let's connect this to her current trajectory, because her rise hasn't just been about results, it's been about visibility, and this is where things get really unique. Her Filipino fanbase has essentially accelerated her presence on tour before her ranking fully caught up. That's rare. Usually, fanbases grow after results, but in her case, the emotional connection came early, and that creates pressure, but it also creates momentum. And I think she's handled that balance surprisingly well. Because when she talks about being one drop of water, I don't hear a cliché, I hear a long-term vision. She understands that her success isn't just individual, it's structural. If she keeps winning, keeps showing up, keeps being visible, she becomes proof of concept. And proof of concept is what builds systems. You can't develop a tennis ecosystem without examples, without someone showing that it's possible. And that's where her decision to leave actually loops back and benefits the Philippines. Because here's the irony, she had to leave to eventually help build something back home. That's the cycle. Now I want to zoom in on the technical side again, because her clay performance recently gives us clues about how that academy training is translating. Clay is all about patience, point construction, heavy topspin, and physical endurance. It exposes weaknesses brutally. If your footwork isn't efficient, you're late. If your shot tolerance is low, you leak errors. If your tactical IQ isn't sharp, you get outmaneuvered. So when she rates her level on clay and continues to compete effectively, that tells me her baseline game is stabilizing. That's a huge step. Because transitioning from junior success to WTA consistency often comes down to whether your game holds up in slower, more demanding conditions. And that's where academy training really shows its value. Those long drilling sessions, those repetitive patterns, those endurance-based practices. They're built for surfaces like clay. Now let's talk about the bigger picture, because she's not the only player to come through that system. The Rafa Nadal Academy has produced multiple players who've transitioned to the pro level, but what makes her different isn't just the training, it's the narrative around her. She represents something larger than rankings. And that can be both an advantage and a burden. Because expectations scale faster than results. But again, this goes back to that early decision at 13, when you've already taken a leap that big, the pressure later doesn't hit the same way. You've already faced the hardest part, leaving home, adapting, surviving in a high-performance environment. Everything else becomes part of the process. And I think that's why her story matters beyond just tennis fans. It's about understanding what it actually takes to compete globally in a sport that's incredibly unforgiving. There's no shortcut. There's no local workaround. At some point, you have to step into the highest level of competition available to you. And she did that earlier than most. Now the real question is what happens next. Because the foundation is clearly there, the training, the mindset, the support system, the fan base. But the next phase is about consistency. Can she string together wins on tour? Can she handle different surfaces week after week? Can she convert tight matches? That's where careers are defined. And I'll say this, based on what I've seen, the trajectory is real, not hype-driven, not purely emotional but structurally backed. And that's the difference between a good story and a sustainable career. So when people focus on that one quote, "I had to get out," I think they're missing the bigger message. It's not about leaving, it's about leveling up. It's about recognizing where you are, where you need to be, and having the courage to bridge that gap, even if it means everything changes. And in her case, that decision at 13 might end up being the single most important shot she ever took, not on the court but off it. If you made it this far, you already get it. This wasn't just about leaving home, this was about leveling up, about making a decision most players never have the courage to make. And now the real story is just getting started. Let me know what you think. Was that the right move at 13, or too